2 years ago, I founded the Orlando Ostriches, which is a made-up NFL team, and my basic idea was if I could create an NFL team, how good would they be? If I was a GM, how good of a team could I make? It was kind of an interesting, I thought, idea to kind of show my basic team building philosophies and basically put them to the test. See if they make sense, see if I'm an idiot, see if I actually know a thing or two, and in some instances, both. So without further ado, let's first get into what the team was last year. We're then going to, get into how good they played last year, how good would that team have ended up being, and then we will make moves for this following year. I did a mock draft, I did mock free agency, so yeah, let's just jump into it, starting off with what happened last year. So first, let's do a refresher on what my team is. So again, just so you know what you're looking at, the number next to these players' names is how many millions of dollars they earn a year, and then for how many times you see it, that's how many years. So for example, Matt Corral's contract, he's worth $2.3 million for each of the next 3 years. CJ Stroud, $9.5 million for each of the next 4 years, and plus there is a fifth-year option. This was, again, prior to last season. These were the players. So, did a good job drafting CJ Stroud last year. That worked out all right. So well done there. And that kind of, I think, really makes the whole Orlando Ostriches franchise just feel a lot better. When you get the star quarterback, which, again, I could have stuck with someone like Bailey Zappi, who had a good rookie year, but at the end of the day, it's worth trying to get the great guy. If you have an opportunity, go out, keep drafting quarterbacks until one hits. That philosophy makes sense because, hey, if only 1/3 of quarterbacks hit, well, in 3 years, you should have a good quarterback if you keep drafting them. So that worked out. Not always going to work out as well as CJ Stroud worked out, but it still did work out. The receivers, there's some hits and misses. So, Amari Cooper, that was a good trade by me back in the day, 2 years ago. The Allen Robinson contract was definitely a misfire. Had to pay him $17.1 million last year. That was not good. Alec Pierce hasn't really lived up to the hype when I drafted him, and DJ Chark didn't do a lot either. But I signed Jacoby Myers last year, and that's been a good contract. So 2 wide receivers, although not the maybe not the high end of wide receivers. So for the, where does this rank in terms of tier rankings? Well, I use PFF data to, gather these groups into tiers. CJ Stroud, with some Bailey Zappi time, because CJ Stroud did miss a couple games, was just good enough to get to tier 2. So it's tier 2. There's 5 tiers, 1 being the best, 5 being the worst. The receiving core ends up tier 3, while, Amari Cooper and Myers are very good. The lack of depth there really hurt me, and maybe is something I will address this next offseason. But before we get to that, let's go to the offensive line, which, again, had its hits and misses. Now, my philosophy on offensive line is I want to try and build, get 5 just playable guys. I want to get 5 guys who I know aren't going to be a mess, because really, the bad offensive lines aren't the ones that don't have stars. The bad offensive lines are the ones that have big weaknesses. Ben Jones ended up not playing last year, so that ended up being $7.5 million not getting put to good use. Gladowski, Karras, and Beachum all were fine. Morgan Moses was very good when he was out there, so that definitely kind of saved the offensive line a little bit. It's something that on paper doesn't look like a great offensive line, but it was still good enough for tier 3. It wasn't super high in tier 3, but the lack of a clear weakness other than center, which I had to use replacement level PFF grade for center, which is never good. That brings the average down. It still didn't bring it down quite enough that I still kind of avoided those really bad offensive lines by still having 4 playable guys and 4 quality guys. Tight ends, not great. Jeremy Ruckert and Jordan Atkins didn't really help a lot in the receiving game or the blocking game. That is factored into the data, which tiers they get. And then Kyron Williams, who I spent a 7th round pick on a couple years ago, ended up having a great year. In fact, he was good enough for tier 1 running back play. So tier 1 running back play for a 7th round pick, that ends up being a pretty good value contract at just $1 million for, that last season and then the next 2. As for my secondary, I pumped a lot of resources into the secondary, but that didn't quite fully work out. Now, so the J.C. Jackson contract was a horrible misfire. And I was with the Chargers on that one, but I missed on that one pretty badly. Levi Wallace and Casey Hayward weren't able to do a lot this year. Although Derek Stingley who had a rough rookie year, had a great second year. And I feel very good about that draft pick now. The first draft pick the Orlando Ostriches made, I think definitely worked out well in that category. Patrick Peterson also didn't, he wasn't terrible. He was ended up being our number 3 corner, which still works, but wasn't ideal. But also the Jamel Dean signing also kind of saved this, as I decided to go out and pay Jamel Dean, even though we had a lot of corners already, just because I was like, yeah, we have a lot of corners, but they haven't been playing that well. I wanted to add another guy, so I just made that a little bit of a risk, but it worked out. Jamel Dean has been a good corner when he didn't get a lot of playing time. So again, and the safety group isn't great, but having 2 good corners does go a long way in this scenario. So the coverage unit was actually tier 2, which was surprising to me, but part of that was TJ Edwards at linebacker also did very good. Alexander Johnson didn't play, but TJ Edwards essentially having 2 top tier corners in Jamel Dean and Derek Stingley takes a lot of that cover. That's really where it's coverage is kind of weighted, is those top 2 corners, and then having a good linebacker helped as well. And there's still depth with Patrick Peterson, and Brian Cook and Taylor Rapp weren't great, but there still is some value there. So yeah, ended up being a tier 2 coverage unit. This was a good coverage unit despite paying J.C. Jackson way too much money. And then finally, the defensive line, which is by far and away the biggest weakness, as the Drake Jackson and Cameron Thomas draft picks just really haven't worked out. The interior defensive linemen are mostly filled of late-round picks, but one of those late-round picks might stand out to you. That is Kobe Turner, who I had completely forgotten that I had drafted. I think I just, if I remember correctly, drafted him because I'm like, he has some nice analytics. Let's get this guy. And turns out those analytics were true, as he had an amazing rookie year. I said earlier this year that I thought he deserved Rookie of the Year. I thought he deserved the award defensively. So, while that's not a great looking defensive line, the fact that I got Kobe Turner on now a cheap deal for next 3 years, I feel pretty great about that. And then Younghoe Koo didn't have his best season, but still. So this is where my total, that's my team. If we look at where they ranked in every positional category, you see, again, a lot of 2s and 3s here. The only tier 1 was running game, which, again, was a 7th-round pick on Kyron Williams. Tier 5s in run defense and pass rush certainly hurts, and it's something I do want to address this offseason to try and fix. But, yeah, as a whole, this was a good team last year. The total wins using this algorithm, that I created the algorithm before I, started drafting players, and while it's a little unfair because I can try to draft or assign players that work well for the algorithm, it still is a 10.3 win team is, I think, for me at least, I'm happy that I was able to get a team pretty good. Again, a huge part of that was hitting on the CJ Stroud selection. The NFC South is the division that we played in. So just to clarify why that's the case is, I simply just did a random number generator, happened to be in the NFC South, which was kind of funny, although it is worth mentioning 10.3 wins would have gotten the Ostriches into playoffs in any division. But, due to the fact that I don't want to kick a team out, essentially the way we're doing it is I'm going to just randomly assign a division every single year. This year, NFC South, good enough to make the playoffs, but not good enough to beat the Philadelphia Eagles. The way I'm doing it is there's no upsets. You always lose to a team in the playoffs. If you have a worse record, you always beat a team in the playoffs. If you have a better record, had a worse record than the Eagles. So even though, let's be honest, they would have beaten the Eagles with how bad they were playing in the playoffs. Does not work. Ostriches make the playoffs, but get a home playoff game too, but ultimately go one and done. So, okay. Great second year in Ostrich history, but now we have to, try to improve upon it, right? Made the playoffs, but the goal is to try and win a Super Bowl. So what am I doing? Well, first, there's some free agents that are walking away. These are the 6: Alexander Johnson, Levi Wallace, Casey Hayward, Jordan Atkins, Ben Jones, and DJ Chark. And while a couple players are maybe interesting to re-sign, I ended up not re-signing any of them. All of them have currently left, so this is just money that I can now spend on other players. On top of that, I have now cut Allen Robinson, Patrick Peterson, and J.C. Jackson. So, Allen Robinson and Patrick Peterson, not a ton of dead cap. J.C. Jackson's the one that has more dead cap, but because I did have him, I kept him for an extra year, there's now just $8 million in dead cap. So I am saving over $30 million by getting rid of these 3 players, none of which, Peterson was the only real contributor there, but I just don't think he's worth the $7 million at this point. And so these were the players I added. I decided to sign some players, and to simulate this as fair as possible, I add the players and then I do my draft. So when I added these players, I had no idea who I was going to draft. I went with Kendall Fuller, who was in a real value deal with Miami. And also, I should mention, the way that I pay these players is the ratio I use is I have to pay 10% more than whatever they got from another team. That's kind of the way I do it. If they re-signed with their previous team, then I have to pay 20% more. That's the algorithm there. And there's some things like, so Marquise Brown, a player I probably would have signed, I did not sign here because I don't think he would have signed up the Ostriches. He wanted to play with the Chiefs, right? So I do factor that in as well. I signed Kendall Fuller to a pretty sweetheart deal. I did trade for Stephon Diggs. So again, he basically has one cheap year, and then you got to pay him if you want to. But I decided to re-sign Stephon Diggs here. Not re-sign him. I decided to trade for Stephon Diggs here. Doing the same thing the Texans did, who have C.J. Stroud, interestingly enough. Frankie Louvu, I decided his name got is underlined due to Microsoft Word not understanding that that's not a word. But yeah, decided to sign Frankie Louvu, get a good linebacker there. Connor Williams, get a good interior offensive linemen, along with Kevin Zeitler. Again, these are the contracts I like, these mid-tier, get a quality player, don't have to break the bank to do it, style of offensive linemen. And I decided to address the defensive line, as I mentioned, getting DJ Reader, Chase Young, and Jadeveon Clowney, all for what I think is not horrible deals here. Yes, I'm pumping a lot more resources than I usually pump there, but I think because of the CJ Stroud contract and because I got rid of some of these bad contracts, I have the ability to do it, and a lot of these contracts aren't that scary. The only ones that could really hurt me too much after this season would be Frankie Louvu or Connor Williams, but even those aren't terrible, and I'm willing to take the risk because I think that they are good players. So yeah, definitely making an effort to complete the front seven, which I need to do. And now it's time to draft. So this was my draft. I used the Pittsburgh Steelers because that's where, we would have picked around then. So that's what I decided to go with because the Steelers had 10 wins. So this made the playoffs. So this is where we draft. And with pick 20, I went with Byron Murphy the second because, listen, you might sit here and say, wait a second, you got Kobe Turner and you just paid DJ Reader. Why are you going after another interior defensive lineman? Well, because I think he's the best player that's still available. And, whatever best player available is, you should take him because otherwise you're essentially taking a worse player. Now, within reason, if it's close and you need something else, go for it. I would have loved to get a Brian Thomas, which I think could have really helped, but he wasn't available. He had already been drafted. So Byron Murphy, I think should be a really good player. Could be a cornerstone piece for us for years to come. And same with corner, Ennis Rakestraw Jr. So I did address corner, right? And corner was actually something we were good at last year. So despite the fact that we were good at it, I added Kendall Fuller, and I'm drafting a guy. But again, I think it's something that I think was the best player available, and you can never have enough corners, I think, because, it can be fluky. Guys can't have down seasons. Guys can get hurt, all that stuff. Cameron Kitchens, a safety. I decided to select him in the third round because, again, could use a safety. That is kind of a bit of a need pick, but he was still someone who was high up on my board at that point. And then DJ James, again, kind of best player available mindset there. Theo Johnson was pretty close to best player available and also a tight end, a position of needs. So, I'm willing to care about need a little bit more once we get later into the draft. I think that's fine. You do see that there's some trades there. Those were just, I had to, to make this thing work for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I had to make sure they had all of their draft picks that they had, some they have traded away, and, they have some extra ones, so I had to kind of fix that. But Jalen Green was the edge rusher I selected in round 6, who had some really good pass rushing analytics. And then I went with a linebacker in round 7, Darius Mayasu, who again I think has some interesting analytics. So we'll see if I can replicate the Kobe Turner magic with maybe Jalen Green. But for now, these are the 7 players that I have added to my team. So again, to reiterate what my roster is, we have CJ Stroud along with Corral and Zappi as backups, and as of this season, this receiving core looks very good. Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, Jacoby Myers, and maybe we'll get something out of Alec Pierce as well. Now, Diggs and Cooper are older and are on the last year of their deal, so I would have loved to add another receiver. It just, the draft, they never fell for me, so it is what it is. I would have loved to get one in round 2 or 3, but it wasn't the right move at that point, unfortunately. But I do still think that this could be, again, on paper, Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, and Jacoby Myers is like an elite 1-2-3 combo. Could be one of the best receiving cores in the league if they can all stay healthy and live up to their potential. So, as a whole, this looks very good. I'm very optimistic about how this will play next year. As for the rest of the offense, we have, the offensive line, which a lot of guys on one-year deals. So definitely going to have to re-sign some players. But still, I think this should be a good offensive line. I kind of addressed my biggest weakness and got a good quality backup in Kevin Zeitler, and added Theo Johnson at tight end. We'll see what he can do. Kyron Williams, still, I expect to be a good halfback for us. And then as for the back seven here, Derek Stingley and Jamel Dean are still, a potential elite 1-2 corner combo, with Kendall Fuller as a great number 3, and Ennis Rakestraw Jr., should say Rakestraw, not Eekstraw, also an interesting prospect that I think could be very good. We could legitimately have like a bunch of good corners, because DJ James is also, I liked him enough to spend a relatively quality pick on him. And adding another safety. The safety unit defensively is probably my biggest concern right now, as I feel like we have a lot of depth in corner, but what is Cameron Kitchens going to do as a rookie? Can Taylor Rapp and Brian Cook just be okay? Which is all I need from them, but still, it's a concern. Linebacking core should be really good with TJ Edwards and Frankie Louvu, and I even added a linebacker. We'll see what happens there. Finally, the defensive line, which, again, Drake Jackson, Cameron Thomas, maybe one of them will finally break out in year 3, not banking on it, but even if they don't, Chase Young and Clowney, I think, should be really good edge rushers, and even Jalen Green, I'm optimistic about as a potential sort of third down pass rushing guy. Who knows what'll happen. Again, interior, you got Neil Farrell Jr. and CJ Wright, and Jonah Tavai. Not expecting much from those three, but Kobe Turner, DJ Reader, and Byron Murphy. And, if Byron Murphy hits, potentially having him and Kobe Turner for, years to come could be very good to help stop the run and help rush the passer as well. And I still have Younghoe Koo for another 2 seasons. So, yeah. Orlando Ostriches, can we be a Super Bowl contender? I don't know. I think I still have some concerns about the receiving core, just because it's only 3 guys. If someone gets hurt, we could be in trouble. I would have liked to get more depth there. Depth matters so much. Again, could be an offensive line injury, but I think we're probably 2 offensive line injuries away from that faltering too much. And then the safeties is a bit of a concern, but. Again, I like how this team is constructed right now. I think that I'm optimistic about how it could work going forward. We'll see what happens, but as of right now, Orlando Ostriches feel like they're in a pretty good place. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, I should mention it now. If you were wondering, if you traded for Stephon Diggs, what did you give up for him? I should have mentioned this earlier. It was a second-round pick. Again, the idea is essentially that whatever I trade for a player, if it's a real trade that happened, I have to give up more value than what was given up. So I went with just a second-round pick flat. However, I forgot to factor that in when I did my draft, so I still get Ennis Rakestraw. I'm going to just keep him, and I gave up next year's second-round pick. So I put in my notes, no second-round pick next year, so that's how that works. But yeah, that's the Ostriches. What do you think of all of this? Let me know in the comments below. Do you think this team could win a Super Bowl, or at least go on, win a playoff game, try to go in the right direction as we're trying to take advantage of some of these good rookie contracts? Or do you disagree? Do you think I'm an idiot? It's a fun thing. I also should mention, listen, some people might put it in the comments, I know it's not a perfect formula. I know it's not, because I can do this doesn't mean that I would definitely get a playoff caliber team if I were to, be a GM. I know there's a lot more to it. It's just kind of a fun exercise. So yeah, that's what I think. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.